Hello, hello. It's another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the film Adaptation, which is one of my favorite movies, and it's definitely one of my, actually it is my favorite screenwriter who wrote Adaptation. His name is Charlie Kaufman. And if you've seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or Being John Malkovich, those are the other big movies that he's kind of known for. He also directed a handful of other movies, such as Synecdoche, New York, and most recent one was I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which I think was a Netflix release. That one's pretty good as well. But Eternal Sunshine, maybe I'll make a video about it someday. That is probably my favorite movie ever. It is everything. It's the most important film of our age, I would say, and the best love story, I guess, that exists. It's really really great. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend seeing that. But I want to talk about adaptation today because I kind of wanted to piggyback off of my last video, which is about Daoism. And I recently rewatched Adaptation. I've seen it many times, but I hadn't seen it in maybe a year, maybe more actually. And I wanted to watch it, so I did. And something I realized about that movie is that it's a really great example of kind of Daoist philosophy in film. And in particular, I feel like it has a lot to say about kind of a Taoist perspective on depression, and I guess which is kind of interrelated and sometimes the same thing, but also writer's block, a creative stagnation, which tends to kind of coincide with depression. So yeah, that's what I think it's about, and I wanted to kind of chat about it. I wanted to gush a little bit about this movie that I love so much. So the interesting thing about it, and I'm gonna spoil everything. So like, if it's a movie that you want to see that you haven't seen yet, I highly recommend you watch it. It is a very spoilable movie. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of twists and turns, and it's really a great thing to experience for yourself. So I would recommend you do that. Should you feel so inclined, if you haven't seen it. But essentially, the idea is this movie was Charlie Kaufman's follow up to Being John Malkovich, which I also recently rewatched twice. And great movie. It's a really great movie. Not my favorite Charlie Kaufman movie. I would say in terms of written by Charlie Kaufman, I would say it goes Eternal Sunshine, Adaptation, Being John Malkovich, from best to worst, or best to least amazing, basically. Like, Being John Malkovich is great. But essentially, the movie opens up, and they're on the set of Being John Malkovich, and John Malkovich is there, and it's like actual like behind the scenes footage of Being John Malkovich, and then the camera turns, and it says Charlie Kaufman, and Nick Cage comes out, and he's playing Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter of the movie that he's in, and also Being John Malkovich. So immediately it's a little bit of a mind bender, this movie. Charlie Kaufman himself, the screenwriter of the movie, is essentially the main character. And so, like, it's such a good movie because it's got such a strong thematic core. It's so strong, in fact, that the title of the movie it could not be more. There's no way that this movie could be named anything else, because it's a kind of a double meaning, and this theme of adaptation is it's baked down deep in the DNA of this movie, and it expresses itself in every facet of it. But the kind of one of the meanings of this double meaning of adaptation is that it is literally an adaptation of a book called The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. And so, what you kind of figure out, I mean, it tells you, at the beginning of the movie, one of the first things it says is like, this movie is an adaptation of The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. But you almost immediately realize that this is not your average everyday movie adaptation of a book. Because Charlie Kaufman is the main character of it, and he does not appear in The Orchid Thief. But to give a little background, like The Orchid Thief is basically just this book, this journalist woman, Susan Orlean, right? Yeah, Susan Orlean. She hears about this guy, John LaRoche, who is a white guy who got arrested for picking ghost orchids with a group of natives, and kind of trying to find a loophole in the system by surrounding himself with, and I think employing, or I don't really quite understand what the relationship is, but basically, like, he never is the one who is picking the ghost orchids. It's always these natives who apparently have like some legal exclusion from this law that makes it so that you cannot pick the ghost orchids. But he gets arrested anyway, and he gets tried in court. And so like, the book is largely about her following this guy and kind of just learning about him and learning about the ghost orchid and orchids in general from this dude who is just obsessed with orchids. And I haven't read The Orchid Thief. I should probably do that. So it's a little bit unclear, like, where the book ends and where the movie begins. And the book is about real things that happened in real life. And the movie is kind of a weird mishmash of fiction and nonfiction. It's very hard to tell sometimes which things are which. And obviously, with the introduction of Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter, it gets real meta, gets real brain twisty. But essentially, kind of what you pick apart as you go through this movie is that what's happening is it's Charlie Kaufman struggling to figure out how to adapt The Orchid Thief into a film in a way that he is satisfied with and a way that he feels that he can be proud of. And the problem is that this is, before Being John Malkovich comes out. So it's before he has kind of all the accolades. That was his first screenplay. Or his first, screenplay that actually made it to a film that came out. And so he's really struggling with his self-confidence and his ability to write. And so much of the first 2/3 of the movie is just Charlie Kaufman, played by Nick Cage, just having these very depressive, self-critical, like overtly and exaggeratedly self-critical, intrusive thoughts and thought loops of him just being like, I suck, I'm fat, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm 40 years old and I haven't figured out anything yet. So he's like struggling to write this adaptation of a book about flowers. And so, Charlie Kaufman, if you're familiar with him at all, you would know that something about him and about his writing style is that he likes to write kind of surreal and not very traditionally structured films. And so this was a big challenge that he took on, was adapting a book about orchids. and I don't want to just kind of summarize the whole plot, but like that's kind of the setup that you gotta know is that like much of the movie is Charlie Kaufman himself struggling to write the movie that you're watching, um, and so you see it play out. You see, it's like two plot lines. One is the things that happen in the Orchid Thief, um, and the things that happen as Charlie, the character of this film, is struggling through writing this movie about what happens with uh, John LaRoche and Susan Orlean. And Charlie has this kind of recurring thing that he's having trouble with. He's like, I don't want this to be Hollywood. I don't want to Hollywood it up, you know? And he has this whole like monologue kind of thing where he's like, I don't want drugs. I don't want car chases. I don't want a dramatic death scene. I don't want characters who learn and change and have a lesson that they take away, into their life, into the sunset. He's like, I like making movies about characters who are flawed and fucked up and don't learn anything because that's more like real life. Um, and so this is like the kind of struggle he's having is he's trying to figure out how to make a movie out of this book about flowers that doesn't really have a central plot, and doesn't really have any kind of narrative intrigue. But he's Charlie Kaufman. He's the kind of guy who does the non-traditional movie stuff, and so he's really struggling with this because he's like, I should be able to do this and I can't, and he keeps trying, and he'll write a sentence or two and be like, I need a break, and then go into these thought loops about how shitty he is and how fat he is and like all that stuff, and how his hair is thinning and how he can't connect with women and like all that stuff, and there's a specific moment with John LaRoche, and so I think to kind of get to my point about where Daoism comes into the mix, like this character John LaRoche, again, not entirely sure how accurate the portrayal is to the actual book, The Orchid Thief, or the actual dude, but he's kind of a very central and representative symbol for kind of Daoist thought in this movie, which is very interesting because, and it's perfect. It's like, because he's not a guy. He's just like, he's this toothless, like kind of white trash, I guess, if that's a weird phrase, but but you know what I mean. Like he's like this toothless dude. He's like a poor white guy, and he doesn't think about philosophy. It's not like this guy read the Tao Te Ching or Zhuangzi, which is, it's perfect. It's really the ideal Taoist, right? Which is someone who lives this life without ever having had anyone to tell them to do it that way. The way that I describe, Taoism to people who aren't into philosophy, usually those people are like, and I've heard some version of this many times of like, yeah, I think philosophy is interesting or whatever, but like, it just makes me think too much about life, and I just don't want to be thinking about that. I just want to be living life, and it's like, well, congrats, like you're a Taoist and you don't know it. And Taoism essentially is just philosophy for people who can't do that because their brain is constantly trying to analyze things and understand things, and it's a way to resist that, and it's a way to kind of reorient your brain so you aren't doing that so compulsively, and that's how philosophy people kind of tend to be. And so John LaRoche is like definitely this type of character. Like he's a go with the flow kind of guy. But in particular, he has this obsession with orchids, but orchids haven't always been his thing. His thing has always been something different. So there's one specific scene where he's talking about fish, and how he collected fish, and he had this fascination with fish that just like totally overtook his life. And this character slash real life person, Susan, is like, well, don't you feel any like isn't it sad, or isn't there some mourning, when you go from being completely obsessed with something to changing your mind and going with something else. And he tells the story about the fish, and he says, I live fish, I breathe fish. That's all I could pay attention to. That's all that interested me for this time, was fish. And then one day, I felt, I'm done with fish, and I'm done with the ocean. And I said that day, fuck fish and fuck the ocean. And so much so, I'm badly ad-libbing what he says in the movie, but so much so that fuck fish and fuck the ocean so much that I haven't been in that ocean, I haven't touched that ocean in years, and I haven't swam in the ocean for years. I love the ocean, but fuck the ocean. And it's my favorite movie quote of all time, if I could actually remember word for word what it said. But that's essentially the point, is that, yeah, one day he decided fuck fish, and he was done with it, and he moved on to something else. And yeah, this character LaRoche, through Charlie Kaufman kind of exploring this character, this real life person, and his attitude towards things, he learns to work through this mental state that he's in by taking a little bit of taking a little influence from John LaRoche. And you start to see slowly through the movie that he becomes more open-minded about things, particularly his screenwriting. And little by little, he starts to allow himself to lean into some of the things that he felt so repulsed by in writing before. And so it kind of all culminates in this one specific scene where he goes to like a screenwriting workshop with this famous screenwriting workshop guy who his fictional, not a real life person, his fictional twin brother, Donald Kaufman, who is also played by Nick Cage, of course, who's kind of like the dumb, easy-go-lucky kind of brother, alter ego version of Charlie. And his brother was like going to these guys, or going to his workshops and being like, "Oh, dude, bro, you gotta go see this. You learned so many things." And he's like, "No, that shit sucks. If someone tells you how to make a good script, they don't know what the hell they're talking about, because it's gotta be authentic and it's gotta be original. And if someone is gonna tell you how to do something, then it's not original." But yeah, so you see him in this scene, kind of humbled and deciding to try it out, to experiment a bit and see what it's all about. So he goes to the screenwriting thing, and he raises his hand, asks a question, and the dude calls on him, and he says, "So, what if I want to write a movie where no one learns anything and nothing happens, and there's nothing to be gained, no progress is made, just like real life?" And of course, the screenwriter guy, who's got a bit of a potty mouth, he's like, "What the fuck do you mean things don't happen in real life?" He's like, "Every day people are getting murdered and they're falling in love. Every day, someone's best friend sleeps with their significant other. Every day there are wars and there's genocide." He's like, "What the hell are you talking about that things don't happen in real life?" And he just kind of he tells him off, and he's like, how the hell are you going to write a story if no one learns anything. And he says, like, specifically, what you need. He reads. He essentially he goes to his he gets him a beer afterwards, and he gives him this specific bit of advice to kind of close out the conversation after he reads what he has so far for the Orchid Thief adaptation, and he says, "What you have is great, but what you need is you need your characters to change, and as long as your characters change, in whatever way that they do, then you're good." And then, basically you kind of see the process of Charlie, where the movie starts to kind of eat itself, like Ouroboros, which is also a theme. Charlie's like figuring out. There's some character, I don't remember, maybe it's the screenwriter guy, I can't remember who it was, but someone says, like, you need to, if you're having writer's block and you can't power through whatever you're trying to do, what you need to do is you need to write about the thing that you are most obsessed with, or the thing that you're most fixated on, and it will push you through. And so he kind of has this epiphany moment where he realizes that he's constantly in these negative thought loops, talking shit on himself and talking about how fat he is and shit. And he's like, well, clearly the thing that I'm most obsessed with and the thing that's always on my mind is me, and I can't stop thinking about myself. And so the only way that I can get out of this rut is to work myself into this movie. And so you kind of discover how Charlie Kaufman gets to the point where he writes himself into his adaptation of The Orchid Thief in the movie that you're watching, which is the adaptation of the Orchid Thief. And so this all culminates, this kind of first and second act. The first act particularly kind of setting up Charlie. The second one setting up John LaRoche and Susan Orlean. Excuse me. And so you have that you have this setup, right? And you get to this point where Charlie learns that he needs to write himself into the script, and that the one thing that he needs is for his characters to change. And so the beautiful twist of this movie, the best, I would say, the best kind of employment of this idea of a mind-bending, self-referential Ouroboros style of movie is that Charlie Kaufman's character development as a character in this movie is written into his adaptation of The Orchid Thief, which is basically the entire third act is him personally kind of chasing after Susan Orlean and John LaRoche because he thinks that there might be a spicy plot going on that we don't know about, because allegedly and in real life Susan and John don't have any kind of deep relationship outside of the journalistic professional relationship. But he has this inkling that there's something more, so he goes and chases after them, and basically to put it short, the whole third act of the movie is him just going ham on all the shit that he felt too superior for as a screenwriter. So there's drugs, there's guns, and people get shot, and there's car chases, and there's sex, and dramatic, death, and all the stuff that he said early in the movie that he wouldn't ever do. He wouldn't ever write into a movie. And so the main character development in this movie is the screenwriter going through this depression and realizing that whatever worked before is not working anymore, and learning to adapt. And okay, so like here's how we get into the more of the Daoist stuff, which is that the Orchid Thief and John LaRoche, like something that's really kind of central to this character, to this person, is that most of his obsession, like the fish and the ocean, and particularly the orchids, is that he has these obsessions with nature and natural things. And he talks about how the ghost orchid works, and that basically that and in all flowers and all nature is that they adapt. So, for example, a flower will bloom in the daytime and then close at night, and so it adapts to its surroundings. And a whole lot of Taoism is kind of, I mean, the way that it's taught a lot of times is through these metaphors of observing nature. And so this adaptation, this change, this ultimate change at the center of everything that you may call the Tao if you were so inclined, Charlie needs to learn to connect with this. And yeah, so basically like his character development takes place in the movie that he's writing, and it's fulfilled by the movie itself changing in the third act to allow Charlie to change, to become a different person. Whether it's a better person or a better screenwriter or whatever, it doesn't matter. But the thing at the core of it is that this is a person who is severely depressed and in a rut, and the reason is because they are holding on to an identity that no longer fits them and no longer serves them. And I mean, I guess that's about it. I don't know if there's anything more to say about that. It's a fucking beautiful movie. I really recommend that you watch it. But, you know, I guess in particular, like, I want to emphasize that I think this is a really interesting and particularly distinctly kind of Taoist perspective on depression. This idea that you can't stubbornly hold on to this identity, and you know, there's all kinds of things that depression comes from, and all kinds of related things. Some of those things are genetic, some of those things are chemical, and that sort of thing. But I would say that an accurately Taoist perspective on depression is generally the idea that you are holding on to something that you need to let go. So much of Taoism is simply just the concept of letting go. And so this is, you know, a particular example of identity, which was kind of the theme of the last video. So that's why we got this good segue. So yeah, so you see this development of Charlie into another version of himself, another version of Charlie Kaufman, and he creates an amazing self-referential movie in Adaptation with an incredible performance from Nick Cage. And then after that goes on to write the best movie ever, which is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which, you know, in some ways it's a return to form, in that Eternal Sunshine, like Being John Malkovich, in some ways makes a statement about how people don't change. Or I would say that in some way Being John Malkovich is a movie about a character who does not change, who does not learn, and constantly falls back into the same pitfalls and never gets any better. Whereas Eternal Sunshine is a movie almost about the beauty of, or not the beauty, but it's a meditation upon why someone may not want to change for the sake of love. And it doesn't really have... I mean, I've gone back and forth on this many times. I've watched the movie a bazillion times. I don't think I have the prime interpretation, or the correct interpretation, but I don't think it really has anything to say. It's not making a moral statement of whether or not this is good, that's what's happening, but in particular it's saying, look at what these people do for love. And is it toxic? Maybe. But it's a very human story. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. I'll close this out by saying, if you find yourself in this situation, as I have in the past many times, that take a look at the flowers, you know, and take a look at the way everything, whether it likes it or not, adapts. And there's a particular quote from Susan, the character of Susan in this movie, where she says, there's something shameful a lot of times about adaptation, about adapting, because it's almost like an admission that whoever you are, whatever you're doing, was wrong. And to admit you're wrong is a shameful thing. But John LaRoche, to kind of push back on this, you know, tells a story about the fish, and if I had to like encapsulate both what this movie is saying and what Daoism is saying a lot, it's that hold on to things, but never hold on too tight, because when they're ready to go, you need to let them go, or you will fester and rot in this stagnation. And whoever it is that you will become, or whoever it is that, or whatever it is that you will become, or whatever is the next thing that you will find, it doesn't really matter. And, you know, in particular, with Charlie's case, it's like, he's a guy who is obsessed with himself. And there's this whole other part of the movie that I really haven't touched on enough, I think. So I want to make sure I do. And he gets it out. He gets out, like, he's able to channel this through his art, this self-obsession, and he gets over it. And essentially, I think what the movie is saying a lot is that when you're in those situations where, like in depression, which, you know, depression, a lot of it really is, it kind of, at its core, comes from self-obsession. Usually, it's the kind of self-obsession that we see in Adaptation, which is an obsession with relentlessly criticizing yourself and relentlessly tearing yourself down. But what we'll learn through John LaRoche and through Charlie's character development in this movie is finding anything external to be fascinated by and to find the beauty in. Because whoever we are is not isolated from everything else out there. We're like flowers. We adapt to what is happening around us. So if we're not connected to what is happening around us, we can't bloom. And I think that's all I have to say about that. So thanks for watching, if you got this far. And that's Adaptation. Watch Adaptation. Watch Eternal Sunshine. Watch Being John Malkovich. I swear to God Almighty that you will not regret watching these movies because they're sublime. All right, thanks. See ya. Oh, I should do a song, huh? Yeah. Oh, what song should I do? Imagine me and you, I do. I think about you day and night. It's only right to think about the girl you love and hold her tight. So happy together. Call you up, invest a dime, say that you belong to me, and ease my mind. Imagine how the world would be so very fine, so happy together. I can't see me loving nobody but you for all my life. When you're with me, baby, the skies will be blue for all my life. Me and me, no matter how they toss the dice, it had to be. The only one for me is you, for me, so happy together. I can't see me loving nobody but you for all my life. When you're with me, baby, the skies will be blue for all my life. Me and you and me, no matter how they toss the dice, had to be. The only one for me is you, and you for me, so happy together. Ba, 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 ba. Yeah, I just learned that right now. It was a little rough, but I hope it was good. I hope you enjoyed it. All right, thanks. See ya.